neighborhood organization in Cincinnati. He has a bachelor's degree from Clark College in Atlanta. He has a Master of Social Work from Atlanta University School of Social Work. He has a Master of City Planning from the University of Cincinnati. And he has a PhD jointly in 3 fields: organizational behavior, urban sociology, human ecology. Not only has he been working in the professional world with neighborhood organizations, he has also been involved in several capacities with the University of Cincinnati, including with their Graduate Department of Community Planning, and a senior research associate with the university. He has a long list of credentials, committee assignments. This is a person very much involved in the politics of neighborhood programs and the inner city in Cincinnati. He's going to lecture and take a number of questions here, because he said what he really likes to do is to talk with people. After the talk, there will be a reception very kindly organized by Jim Harbison, Dan Habenstricker, Jim Kaufman, and Mark Bidwell at 1017 Bethel. That's on the south side of Bethel, right across the street from the Cedars apartment, in between Linden and Locust. White story building, use the back door. Park across the street at the Cedars apartments. So anyway, I hope that we'll get a good session going here, and it can continue on at their house. Dr. Jenkins is talking on strategies for linking black and white neighborhood interests as a new dimension in professional development. Dr. Jenkins?
Let's see if I can get all this. Okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to give you some history in terms of how I got here. I was asked to give a presentation at the AIA conference in Cincinnati to talk about the work that I'd been involved in over the last 12 to 14 years with neighborhood planning groups, city hall officials, the quote movers and shakers in Cincinnati, and the University of Cincinnati. One of your peers happened to be part of my workshop, and I twisted his arm to invite me to come to this university. And matter of fact, when I responded to the invitation, I wanted to know whether or not the student was still here. And they indicated to me that the student had graduated and that moved on to higher grounds. But I was very pleased to receive the invitation, and I have been royally entertained. Matter of fact, anybody tell you that the university is bankrupt, that there's no money in the department for any of your needs, take that with a grain of salt, because there is money at this institution. There's money for all kinds of needs that you might have as students. I can attest to that. Quite seriously, I would like to thank State Representative Goodall and his wife for being present, Dr. and Mrs. Meekers, and any number of faculty people and students that have been most gracious in terms of the reception and giving me an opportunity to exchange ideas and talk with you. And I really appreciate that, and I hope that if ever you're in the Cincinnati environment, please stop by so that we can afford the same kind of reputation and experience. And I really appreciate that, because I got here early and I had the opportunity to move around and see the university. And we all have perceptions, and I want to talk about that in the presentation. And I had no perception at all that I would find a university the size of this one. You know, I had a perception that it was smaller, did not have the volume of buildings, and a lot of prejudicial information I had about Ball State. Now, I can say I had some positive information, since one of our students in the high school is a football player here. And he said that the young ladies are just beautiful, Jerome. I mean, and in the summertime, it's just exciting to be on the college campus because they do things differently, you know. So, so matter of fact, his mother called, and now Dwayman is about 6'7", 200. When he came here, it was 290. And he's been on the Nautilus machine, so he's 260. And his mother called. She said, you know, I'm always concerned about my little baby. And I called, and evidently y'all have integrated dormitories. And a young lady answered the phone, and his mother said, who's this? She said, well, who you want to speak to? She said, I want to speak to my boy, Dwayman. She said, well, I'll go get him. And he came to the phone, and his mother said, well, what is all this liberalism on this campus? I mean, the boys are supposed to live with the boys, and the girls are supposed to live with the girls. And he said, well, Mother, that's kind of old-fashioned. We do things different here at Ball State. So I have some positive perceptions. The thing that I would like to do with you is to share some experiences. And I certainly would not want you to think that I'm an expert, and only share with you some very biased experiences that have been most productive to me as a professional, and some things that I think will be productive and beneficial to you as young professionals. I will say some things that are racially biased, okay? But I don't want you to be bent out of shape, and I certainly don't want anybody to leave here feeling guilty about anything, because I am here in a sincere appeal for this department in this school to do some things with you academically that will prepare you to deal with the greater world out there. And as was said earlier, I teach in the graduate department of community planning at UC. And what we have found out is that we don't do a very good job of preparing students to deal with the real world. And we don't do a very good job of preparing white students to deal with the kind of racial and cultural diversity that they run into once they leave the university, okay? We cannot provide that kind of diversity in terms of student population because the numbers are just not there to generate the kind of quality black students that I think this university is looking for. Now, we have to do some things about that. But given that as it may, I think we have a responsibility to all of you in this room to prepare you to face some real life situations. For an example, one of the things that we have found out is that our graduates leave and for whatever reason move into administrative positions that have to interface with various populations in the community. We have found out that many white students that are graduate of our programs are thrust in the kind of position where either they are orchestrating, designing, or managing programs for people who are not racially made up like themselves. And so therefore we found that we have to do some things in the classroom to give you the necessary skills to be top flight professionals. And in doing that, we need to take a look at our own racial makeup, our own racial biases, to prepare you to work with these communities. And I think we have made some strides. I think we have done some things at the university that bridge the gap of race. Unfortunately, all of us grow up in this country with all kind of stereotypes about each other. And if the group was not as large as it is, I would generally break you up and put you to work to do some exercises that show that this group is no different than any other group in America, white, black, blue, green, or whatever. We all have stereotypes about each other. And these stereotypes get in the way of our professional growth and development. For an example, when I worked in New Orleans, Louisiana, I almost went bananas when I had to work in an all-white, low-income neighborhood. Given my cultural bias coming out of New York City, 134th Street and Lenox Avenue. But my supervisor said that you are a professional at this organization and you must relate and work with this organization to the best of your ability. And I carried a ton of stereotypes and myths inside of me that I had to work with and work strongly in order to provide the kind of professional work that that community needed. Correspondingly, I have found that white students and black students carry the same type of stereotypes. And what we do in professional planning is we don't challenge youngsters, we don't challenge young people to deal with this. Matter of fact, we don't challenge the department severely enough to deal with the kind of cultural diversity that we face here in America. The project that I am intimately tied up in was or is a hallmark in terms of the planning profession. For all intents and purposes, it's a low-income neighborhood, 99 and 44% black and low-income, that at one time was the center of Cincinnati. And I can give you the history where the community moved from being extremely wealthy to being known as Bucktown and ultimately a low-income neighborhood, which it is. What we attempted to do was to capture the energy of the neighborhood people, put it in a professional planning process, utilizing university people to help neighborhood folks plan for their development over historical time. And let me tell you, that was a monumental task. What we did was to deal with a principle of a holistic approach using urban sociologists, urban planners, urban psychologists, urban educators, urban geographers. I think we had a total of 17 professionals from the university, all working with neighborhood people. And what we found out is that through a very creative process, the neighborhood people greatly enhanced the curriculum at the University of Cincinnati. What we found out is that we had highly trained professionals who did not know how to relate to neighborhood people. What we found out is through studio experiences is that the planning professors at the university had a chance to play out their theories and practices. What we also found out is that there was a tremendous amount of cross-fertilization in terms of neighborhood people learning a lot, but also teaching university professors how to sharpen their skills in neighborhood development. The net result of the entire enterprise was a tremendously creative experience that we all grew from. I don't think there's been a person that's been intimately involved in the Queens Gate planning process that has not grown tremendously. Black, blue, green, whatever. What we saw was a classic experiment of bringing together professionals and putting them into a highly focused kind of situation to ensure that the best planning processes would be the net result. Believe this. We had private school individuals work with public school individuals to come up with the best design for public education in the ghetto. We had, for an example, a housing project, which I will go into a few minutes from now, that deals with low-income people in terms of housing ownership. We have a historic preservation site that in a sense is to reverse the regentrification process, where we will say that neighborhood people will have some ownership. Be clear about it, that anybody today, be it black, white, blue, or green, that is operating out of a racist mode will be counterproductive to this society. So what I am here saying to you is that racism won't work. You also need to know that black folks carry as many racist attitudes and opinions about you as white people carry about black folks. And the name of the game is getting beyond that. It's how do we capture a body of knowledge? How do we take professionals, put them in a professional mode, and do the best possible planning in this country? Now, of course, this is atypical, because what we have found is that most white professionals and black professionals really never interact. And one of the things that I've found in myself, in my own career, that I've provided a lot of consultation work to professionals when they are attempting to plan in black neighborhoods. And I've said to myself, this is ridiculous. Do you mean to tell me we train people who are highly professional, but yet when they're engaged in a planning process in black neighborhoods, they go dumb on us? They really don't remember all of the design work, the expertise that have been taught because basically they let racial barriers get in the way of their professional performance. And so part of the stretching of students is to begin to identify situations where students can grow and develop over historical time. What we are talking about is how do we take young professionals like yourself, provide you creative experience where you can grow beyond where you are as individuals. Now, I had an opportunity to move around this community, and I have some surface understanding of what the community is all about. And I looked at the studio, and I was greatly pleased seeing the studio project. Matter of fact, I think that form of learning really should be created, expanded upon, because in that situation, there are opportunities for you to get into black neighborhoods and white neighborhoods and do some creative things that you aren't doing heretofore. One of the things that I found that is very interesting about planning is that we really don't do a very good job of understanding ethnic communities and what our responsibility is as a teaching learning institution. Now, when I came to Ball State, I said my first impression was the fact that Ball State is an urban institution, because there's no way in the world you can be in a city the size of Muncie and not be an urban institution, and providing the kinds of learning experiences to black communities, white communities, industrial communities that this community is demanding. One of the things in the early dinner discussion is here in the State Senate to talk about the needs in this community, the needs for good solid planning, the needs for housing preparation, the needs for housing preservation, the things that only graduate students that we feel can really accomplish, but they only can be accomplished through a focused kind of environment. And so the Queens Gate 2 planning process is a planning process that took from the University of Cincinnati students and professionals. 92% of the professionals that were involved in the project were white individuals. As I indicated, the community is totally black. And we had a tremendous growth experience to get the two groups together. There are historical biases against this type of operation. Matter of fact, city officials said it would never work because the university is set up to deal with grand theories and not the real live world, whereas the neighborhood and the community is based upon what can you do for me today. And so we had some tremendous amount of experiences. And the net result is, and I will show you a couple of slides of the kinds of things that we've done. Some of you saw the 60-minute program that focused on Cincinnati and dealt with the whole regentrification process. They didn't show the total story. And I indicated to several of the students earlier that they could have shown the Mount Auburn Good Housing Corporation, which is basically a black group that really done a tremendous job in housing rehabilitation. They could have shown the Carl Westmoreland Group in terms of the kinds of things that they have done in neighborhood development and organization. And so what we have found is in the total project, a situation where we had to convince not only the university, but we've also had to convince community people, we had to convince City Hall that a planning process like this could go on. And what I'd like to show you in terms of, and I didn't have time to put these on slides, but for all intensive purpose, the Queens Gate neighborhood is the old town in Cincinnati. I don't know if this will fit up here. Just do it this way. And basically what we are about is the redesign and redevelopment of this neighborhood. And the various colors indicate the phasing. And initially this was not a historic preservation district. And through the efforts of neighborhood people working with the university and city officials, and several other entities, we have gotten this declared a historic district. For all intensive purpose, this was the old town of Cincinnati. And for example, the oldest Presbyterian church in the state of Ohio is in this neighborhood. The old Proctor Cooper family lived in this neighborhood. The old Maumee Coal Company, some of the tremendous giants in the Cincinnati area lived in this neighborhood. And it's gone from being a highly exclusive neighborhood to a low-income neighborhood. What we have been about is to reverse this process. We have been able to, through providing links from the black community to the white community, for an example, get in our public broadcast station, WCET. WCET put a $2 million building in this neighborhood. And for all intents and purposes, what we're talking about is the ghetto. We've been able to, for an example, build a new vocational school that was designed by Urban Design Associates that will be in this school talking to you in the next couple of weeks. We've been able to provide overhead walkways to Music Hall. We've provided housing subsidies for people in this neighborhood. And as I indicated earlier to a couple of the students, anytime you talk about historic preservation today, given the interest rates, you are talking about ensuring that a large percent of the neighborhood is going to be white. Because the interest rates are so astronomical, the kinds of monies that you have to put in to the preservation work is beyond the scope of most neighborhood people. Now, we have been able to get the city of Cincinnati to give us $3.5 million so that low-income people will be able to buy units in here, to rehab these units, and to live in them. We have formed our own West End Development Corporation. The purpose of the West End Development Corporation is to aid and abet neighborhood people to purchase houses in this neighborhood. But I think that one of the things that you need to look at, or we need to look at in terms of planning professionals, is how do we bridge the gap and provide the links between the white community and the black community? Because historically in this country, these groups have never been more or less in a cooperative mode. What we have found out, in as much as Cincinnati is designed the way it is that we operate in neighborhood groups. And there are distinct racial groups, there are distinct ethnic groups, there are distinct class groups. And one of the things, in order to pull off a project of this magnitude, is that you have to make coalitions. You have to make connections between various ethnic groups and economic groups. We have some black militants in the neighborhood, and we've been able to get the black militants to participate in the planning process. Because what we found out is, as people are disenfranchised and move away from the process, that they begin to lash out at it because they don't understand it. We have gotten such groups as the Black Army, the Black Turks, the Black Panther Party, to participate in the planning and development of this neighborhood. We've gotten groups like the Urban Appalachian Council. We've gotten groups like the Sons of Appalachia, to all work together in the planning of a neighborhood like this. And what is required is a tremendous amount of strength on the part of professionals, university people, to get in and mix it up. Because for all intents and purposes, that's what you're talking about. You're talking about bringing black people to the planning process, putting them in the planning process, people who've been heretofore left out of it. We're talking about the role of the university in leadership development training programs, where you bring in indigenous leadership into the university. You put them in a planning and leadership development mode so that they can understand how to plan sufficiently for their neighborhoods. Now, it has not been a process that has been devoid of friction, because we're talking politics. And this university, like the University of Cincinnati, is highly political. There were those professors who received an inordinate amount of heat around their jobs because they did not come up with the right planning decisions. There were those professors who did not receive tenure because they were in this planning process and did not come up with the right kinds of planning designs that the city of Cincinnati was happy with. In some circles, I am called, among other things, black militant, any number of things. But the issue is, when you begin to talk about how do you get planning decisions on the table, representing the focus of neighborhood people, it's not easy. Because there's always a situation where people who control the lives of others feel that these kinds of decisions don't benefit them. And of course, the neighborhood people feel that the decisions that benefit them, they want to participate. And what it does is set up a classic contradiction. Matter of fact, we had urban riots in our community. In fact, I think the thing that catapulted us into this planning process was the fact that we did have the riots, and that the attention was called to the city officials on things we had to do in terms of how to bring together the black community and the white community in a very solid planning process. Now, be clear about it, I think the University of Cincinnati is not doing all it can do. I'm not saying that Ball State here and your department is behind us. I mean, that's nonsense. But I think clearly, in terms of your professional development, there are things that you must be exposed to. I think there are things that this department must expose you to in terms of working with people. Because as planning professionals, you can no longer afford to be able to relate only to people who look like yourselves. If I would imagine you did some tracking of the students in this department in terms of the kinds of jobs they moved into once they graduate, you could see that individuals work with any number of ethnic groups. Matter of fact, many of the students are responsible for planning projects in urban areas. And one of the things that I found out is that we have to infuse into the department courses that deal with racial diversity. Matter of fact, at the university, I teach several courses that deal with management, affirmative action, racial conflicts and tensions. And this is an attempt to give the students some basic understanding of the interaction of communities, black and white communities in our community. One of the things that we found that is so interesting, as I went through and looked at your reading list, and I understand that this is mid a quarter or whatever, but I went through the library and the bookstore to see what books were being recommended to you. And one of the things that I saw was a lot of form and function books, and I understand that. But I think that there also should be books providing you with some experience around the black experience in this country, around people, around Appalachia, because you are in an area where there is a substantial amount of people from the Appalachian area. And in a sense, you get shortchanged, and I'm not here to talk about an indictment, but you get shortchanged around your professional development by not being exposed professionally to the needs of students. I indicate that I consult with a lot of architectural firms that happen to have multi-million-dollar projects in the black community. And they have been somewhat less sensitive to the needs of folks in the neighborhood. For an example, in this particular neighborhood, folks talked about that they wanted independent housing, and that they wanted yards, and that they wanted experiences that were based upon their set of experiences in the Old South. Now, anybody in this room knows that in most urban communities, you don't have the kind of available land to provide Miss Amy with a yard, barbecue pit, so on and so forth. So when the professionals drew up what the neighborhood was to look like, the people have said, well, you folks don't know what a house is supposed to be. I mean, black folks like to have yards where they can barbecue, and I mean, I don't see any area in here for recreation. People said, well, we put in a vest park. We said, well, no, that's not what we're talking about. I mean, what about a neighborhood tavern? What about places to play checkers? The circulation patterns in the neighborhood. People say, well, we're a walking community. We like to walk. I mean, there's not enough trees in the neighborhood. I mean, there are not enough things that relate to what we're all about. Interesting enough, early this evening we got into a discussion about a place called Pearls, which I would imagine is a local tavern in the neighborhood, in the black community, that is really served as a meeting place for black folks to talk politics, to talk strategies, to talk cultural enrichment. And when we began to go through this planning process, what we found out, people are saying, well, where's the meeting hall place? They said, well, what kind of meeting hall? They said, well, we can have our neighborhood meetings, because there are all kinds of associations that exist in our neighborhood that we need meeting space for. So the professionals said, well, what we'll do is put together a community facility. And they said, well, no, we're not talking that kind of meeting place. We're talking a meeting place where people can play tonk and whist and drink and have a good time and be able to talk politics. And so out of it, there was a concept of developing a neighborhood commercial district that would have the kind of pubs and whatever where neighborhood political leaders could get together and shoot the breeze and talk and plan and so on and so forth. They talked about protection for the senior citizens. They talked about the kinds of housing that they didn't want senior citizens isolated from the general mix of the neighborhood. And I think what we have learned from this experience is that we have to put people together. We have to plan neighborhood facilities. We have to plan communities that are based upon the kind of folks that are going to live there. And this is the interesting piece about it, which is the pitfall. With all of the exceptional planning talent that has gone into this neighborhood, I did a study as a graduate student, and I asked all of the professionals, and as I indicated, we had the various disciplines involved in the generation of a model neighborhood. I asked all of the professionals in a very confidential interview, tell me, and I had a very structured kind of, as psychologists do, I had a very structured kind of questionnaire. And I asked them to design for me their ideal neighborhood. And they did that, went through a series of questions. And then I asked, would you live in the neighborhood? And the questions to this very enlightened, very sensitive group of professionals was no. And I said, well, why wouldn't you want to live in the neighborhood, given the fact that we have applied the best planning skills and expertise the university affords? We have consumed $2 million in a planning process that was supposed to be an ideal neighborhood. Why wouldn't you want to live there? And some of the answers were, it's going to be all black. The room sizes in the houses are too small. There are no tennis courts. The educational system is going to be inferior. The housing structures are going to be inferior. The street furniture will be less than adequate. And they ran off a series of negatives. Now remember how I started, that these people were brought in to plan the best neighborhood that we could design, that would be racially mixed, economically mixed, and socially mixed. And after they went through the planning process in a very structured kind of confidential interview, it all came out negative. And we said, well, wait a minute. What seems to be the breakdown, given the fact that you had all the wherewithal to build an excellent community and an excellent neighborhood? Where is the breakdown? And they all said to a person that there are some historic things that are operable in Cincinnati that we feel that we could not break. that no matter how much money we put into this neighborhood, that it was preordained to be a gilded edge ghetto. And as a graduate student, I wrote all of that up. And to a postscript to a book that we are producing, it looks as if it may be a gilded edge ghetto. So given all of the expertise that we have brought, there are certain things operable in our society that pulls us apart as people. And granted, we had the opportunity to do the best design that money could buy for a neighborhood. But what happened is, as they began to design it, and we brought in people who were sensitive, they were not designing for themselves, they were designing for a preconceived notion. And neighborhood people had said to them that we do want some tennis courts. Some senior citizens had said to them, one of the things that we resent about rehab housing is that the rooms are too small because we can't get our furniture in it. The rooms are too small. The walls are too thin. And I could show you, matter of fact, several of the professors went on a walking tour through our neighborhood. You can see some excellent high-rise apartments. And these high-rise apartments are very well built, but they weren't built for human beings. They were not built for the kinds of people and the needs that folks had. So when we looked at what we went about in the Queens Gate 2 project, there was a tremendous amount of learning out of what transpired. We talk about education. If you talk about a heterogeneous neighborhood, one of the things that all middle-class people look for is quality schools. We have the best structures that money could design for schools in this neighborhood. But when we began to talk about impacting the curriculum to be able to draw upon middle-class people, because you know what middle-class people want in education, the school system said that we cannot provide that kind of access in this kind of neighborhood. And we used Dr. Goodson, one of the best urban educators at the University of Cincinnati, to design it. Now it's on the drawing board, but here again, when we begin to talk about getting something off the drawing board to execution, it shook out that no matter how much planning energy we put into this neighborhood, it's still going to be a ghetto. And so many of us have been about trying to change that perceived reality. And that perceived reality has provided all kinds of barriers for us, because in terms of housing subsidies, in terms of interaction of city officials, it's almost like it's been preordained to be a ghetto. And so out of it, I think that we have written several case studies that show how the planning process was supposed to go on and how the planning process got skewed. When we talk about historic preservation, we developed the best social guidelines that we could come up with. And I know the Meekers are involved in historic preservation. We had the best social goals in the world, but no money. And in the name of the game in America is how do you get the investment community to get on with it. We pulled together the Savings and Loans League. They put up all kind of poverty money so that neighborhood people could get involved in the rehab of these houses. We got the best social goals in the world. We have estimated that it's going to run anywhere from $200,000 to $300,000 to rehab these housing structures. Many of these houses have been unoccupied for 20 years with weather damage, erosion. They are beautifully architecturally, but in terms of being able to deal with $250,000, we can have the best social goals in the world, but we can sit here in this room and identify the groups that can afford to rehab these houses. So the neighborhood groups are active, saying the neighborhood's going to be all white and white people are going to come into the neighborhood and do this and do that and do this and do that. But certainly when you begin to talk about $250,000 to rehab a house, there's no rhyme or reason that will indicate that neighborhood people will be able to do the rehab work in that neighborhood. Yes, you might get certain numbers of black individuals moving in there, but the social goals that we have set up to put into this neighborhood will not be realized because of money. The interest rates are just unbelievable. So all of the planning processes that we have gone through, and Lord knows they're the best in the world, they've involved community people. But when it really comes down to putting the bucks to pull this project off, many of us understand that we will not be able to get the social gains that we had documented. We have a beautiful vocational school where community people were involved in the planning process, where they sat down with architects and told them how they wanted the school designed and the makeup and the kind of curriculum, et cetera, et cetera. And at this point, the school is about 50% under capacity, because in the design of the educational curriculum, what was not taken into consideration is the dwindling population in the neighborhood and the fact that many of the curriculums that were being offered in this particular school building were offered in other buildings in the greater Cincinnati area. And given the fact that this is stereotyped as a low-income neighborhood, many people felt somewhat inhibited to come to this particular school, which is known as the Queen City Vocational School, to get the kind of curriculum development that the school provides. And so part of the issue that I raised to you and the kinds of things that we've struggled with in our program is how do you eradicate historic perceptions about neighborhoods? How do you eradicate perceptions that the neighborhood is low income, it's black, it's violent, the incidents of murder, of crime, unwed motherhood, abortion, etc., exist. And no matter what you do to alter the structure of buildings, you still have to relate to that perception. So what we have attempted to do is to get involved in a lot of psychological training and development seminars to help people alter the shape and perception of the neighborhood. Matter of fact, these perceptions were being carried by black folks. We surveyed black people in the community, and we asked them, do you think this neighborhood will ever be anything beyond what it is today? The clarion call was no. We pursued that question, and they found out that, number one, people in the neighborhood did not feel that they had the kind of self-confidence that even though the best planning in the world had gone in this neighborhood, that it was being planned for them. There's this mystical thought that it's planning to remove us from this neighborhood, and it's not planning for us. Matter of fact, some of the neighborhood leaders said, how in the world can we afford a $250,000 house? How can we afford the kinds of things that they put into this neighborhood? So classically, we're in a dilemma. We're in a dilemma in terms of being able to ride through the 60s and the 70s with a tremendous amount of federal program that called for neighborhood development, that provided housing subsidies, that provided all types of programs to foster this kind of planning, and to get into the 80s with the government till being empty. And how do we pull this kind of massive project off? And that's the job we have ahead of us. Because in 1945, a similar experiment was carried on in Cincinnati, and it was a monumental urban removal program of 80,000 black people. 80,000 black people who had their expectations raised around urban renewal would be the new answer to decent housing, the new answer to decent education, the new answer to providing home ownership for people. What it did classically was to raise expectation. And we've been able to do the kind of surveys that show that the riots in Cincinnati started, in a sense, raised expectations on neighborhood people and got them into an 11-year planning process that we could not ultimately pull off because of economics and the lack of the economic wherewithal. And so there are a number of us really struggling to see where can we get the sustenance to make this neighborhood project grow and develop over historic time. The neighborhood development corporations are suffering for the lack of funding. And what we have is a classic situation where we have the best plans in the world, we had the best expertise in the world, and now we have to take it off the drawing board and put the bricks and mortars together that relate to the neighborhood piece. And that's the classic kind of conflict that we're in. I want to show you one of the things we did in terms of trying to capture the cultural sense of the neighborhood. This is a small amphitheater that was designed by neighborhood groups, because there's a long history in the Queensgate area in terms of the development of classical jazz in Cincinnati. And what we found out is that the local musicians and entertainers did not have a forum to express their creativeness. And so a neighborhood group of people actually designed this facility. And this facility is used by many neighborhood groups, local bands, and this is a contemporary dance group, a neighborhood contemporary dance group that is performing in it. And one of the things that if you look at, and you may be able to see the racial mix of people in the neighborhood, one of the things that we were able to do is use the art form to really bring people together. And prior to all of these kind of events, community leaders get up and talk about the kinds of things the neighborhood council is trying to do and to elicit their involvement. Matter of fact, we designed, there is a gizmo which any youngster can go in and put a quarter in, and there's a spotlight that puts him on center stage, and you'd be surprised the kind of pantomime and impromptu artists that get developed out there. Matter of fact, what's interesting about it, if you look at the building at the top left hand, that is the 1st District Police Station, and you'd be surprised the kind of phone calls we get in 2 o'clock in the morning with some youngsters out there depositing 25 cents and doing this little impromptu boogaloo or whatever. But this is a facility that's greatly used, and my agency runs a neighborhood theater group, and we've often put on productions in this facility. And so as I indicated, this facility was designed by neighborhood groups, and it's one that is greatly utilized. And so we have potential, and the key to it is this was built with federal money, and just hopefully that the money will exist to carry out the other pieces to a very exciting project. This is another angle on it. Matter of fact, doing May Festival in Cincinnati. The Cincinnati Symphony uses it for outdoor luncheons, and basically what this is a dramatic group that's doing their little dance. In the background, the School for the Performing Arts provide the music, and there is a picnic lunch being provided for symphony volunteers and etc. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this, people come from various other cities and say, well, how can that go on in a ghetto without people being harassed and so on and so forth. And one of the things that I say is the fact that neighborhood groups have taken particular pride in providing a kind of safe atmosphere where people can come and create. And one of the things that we feel very good about in the project is the fact that many white individuals and white groups have been arm and leg with us in terms of planning. And so what we provide is an atmosphere where black and white people can recreate and do things constructively. And I think if anything that has really made the planning experience positive and the potential for the neighborhood really moving on over historic time is the fact that black and white groups come together. Black and white groups do plan and recreate and do other things of that nature. And this is somewhat atypical today, where people can feel that they have a forum for coming together. Okay. This more or less is the master plan for the entire project. Matter of fact, near center stage top is the little amphitheater that you saw. And the center of the structure is overhead walkways that lead from Music Hall into parking garages. And the matter of fact, we've been able to get the Musicians Union to propose that northern high-rise, which would be a housing facilities for retired musicians. It's a tremendous project if we can pull it off. We have the WCET, which is in. We have the parking garages. The University of Cincinnati and Xavier University have talked in terms of jointly sponsoring a community so that neighborhood people could participate in university experience in their neighborhoods. And so this project is the result of about 12 years of work. We have gotten several additional pieces funded, but I think that here again with federal cutback, we're just hoping that we can pull the other ones off. But here again, I want to indicate to you that this was a project where black and white people worked together with several neighborhood groups, several black and several white neighborhood groups, to get them to the planning table to develop this kind of monumental project. And you know, we have accomplished much of it, but as I indicate, I think the thing that is most difficult for us at this particular stage is seeing the cutbacks in federal money and how that will affect the total project. I think the interesting thing about this, if I can leave you with anything, and that is the tremendous task ahead for planning professionals to be able to tap into the tremendous energy that is afoot in most neighborhood groups and to provide the kind of neighborhood expertise to do that. And that's a very difficult task because what it's about is a lot of give and take on the parts of the professional and neighborhood groups. But without that kind of energy, I think a lot of urban neighborhoods will be lost. I think a lot of urban neighborhoods who could have gotten their act together and turned it around will not be able to do that because of the lack of planning sophistication and the lack of the kind of expertise that a school like this affords. And as I said, who knows where the project is going to go. But there's been a tremendous amount of energy and effort put into it, a tremendous amount of money to bring it to the point in which it's in now. But here again, I think the task is ahead of how do we sustain the neighborhood linkages between the white and black groups that will hopefully be able to get to us the kind of monies that will exist. I'm not naive to think that the Reagan administration will be able to cut off all funding sources. And the key to it is that sophisticated neighborhood groups will get the money to move on and develop their projects. And there's one other thing that I would like to show you if we could turn the lights on. In this project, there are some structures with just outstanding architectural character, just unbelievable. And most of these structures are just huge. Matter of fact, this red turret building, a neighborhood group have formed a joint venture with two white organizations. And this is a rendering from that organization. And I think the price tag on this is something like $1.7 million. And in it, they have designed housing for the elderly. They've also put together commercial structures. They have gotten, for an example, WCET has asked that they be allowed to purchase piece of the facility so that visiting dignitaries could come in and live in this particular building. It's a monumental effort when you begin to talk about that kind of cash outlay in a neighborhood that was previously viewed upon as a black neighborhood. And I think that we have a tremendous marketing job to do to begin to turn the perceptions around in terms of the neighborhood so that we can begin to bring in the kind of client groups that will be necessary to move this neighborhood over historic time. We've tried any number of ventures to get private industry to come in. And I think that one of the things that we have learned about this kind of project is that no neighborhood group can pull this kind of monumental project off by themselves. And it is due to the kind of sophisticated relationships that neighborhood groups can form with industrial groups and commercial groups, all coming together for the revitalization of the neighborhood. There was one urban historian who said that the neighborhood has the potential of being another Georgetown. We believe that, but if you look at the kind of racial makeup of a Georgetown, you know that the Georgetown does not take in consideration the kind of neighborhood people who are there. The main question is whether or not neighborhood people will stand for that, and whether or not we're just flirting with dynamite to really believe that it could be a Georgetown, and the fact that the neighborhood people who reside around them will stand for that. Lastly, we have done some tremendous things with the Metropolitan Housing Authority. We have been able to get them to redesign some of their structures. Matter of fact, we will have the first paid public housing project in the country, the Lincoln Courts Housing Authority building. And the issue now is what happens to all the money that's been generated by the residents. And one of the things that they've done is to begin to plow that money back into facilities. And so we're seeing some development from Metropolitan Housing in terms of lowering the density. They will be able to reduce X number of structures and begin to blend in with this entire scheme. And so as I indicated, this is a monumental project that has really captured the interest of any number of neighborhood groups, both black and white. It has been a struggle, because anytime you bring various ethnic groups to the planning table, there's always going to be pushing and shoving in diversity. The best thing that I can say to you as planning professionals, I think you owe it to yourself. I think the school owes it to you to begin to expand your horizons and to begin to share with you various different cultural aspects. I think there are many number of forms to look at that, but I think the studio that I saw earlier today provides an excellent opportunity for the kind of give and take situation. I think that you can use that studio experience to build upon and begin to relate to other kinds of aspects of the Muncie community in terms of providing that kind of studio experience for industry, for commercial uses, for white Appalachian groups, for black groups, because these are the kind of things that over time gives you the kind of professional education that puts you in the driver's seat to be able to plan creatively with people. I think that it gets beyond race. I think that the communities that we face are demanding a quality of planning that we can't imagine at this particular point. And without the kind of creative interaction that you can get from additional studios, the kinds of things that the department can learn as a faculty. Because if the studios get singled out only as a project of Pat or Tony or this faculty person or etc., and not piece of the overall planning execution of this department, it's lost. And that's the only way I think that you can broaden your horizons in terms of giving you the kinds of things that you need. So hopefully if you wind up in a community like Cincinnati, that you will be prepared to deal with the kind of diversity that you will run into. I did not want to come here to kind of beat you over the head and make people feel guilty around, the fact that you happen to be white. I mean, that's not an issue. I think the thing for me is to begin to expand your horizons and say to you that quality professionals are needed, and the fact that if you provide the kind of expertise and vision, that you will be able to move on and be creative. I know I've gone on and on and on, and there's a lot of things that I want to say, but I think the thing that I appreciate more from you is question and answers, and then that gives me a chance to elaborate on things that I wanted to say and did not say. So why don't we just have some question and answers? Anybody? Yes, sir. Sure. Matter of fact, I think I said to someone earlier in the when we were just chit-chatting, the West End and Washington Park community. Now, the Washington Park community is a heavy Appalachian area. The West End, for all intents and purposes, is a heavy black neighborhood. One of the things that we have been somewhat successful in doing is bridging the gap between race. Because one of the things that we have found out is that deprived neighborhoods get classically pitted against each other for meager resources. And what happened very recently, the city administration wanted to declare the Washington Park area a historic district, all right? Now, there were many very wealthy investors behind that move. Matter of fact, the president of Federated Department Store had formed a neighborhood development group, and they were eager to jump into the Washington Park area because Washington Park faces Music Hall. And the Washington Park organization, the Over the Rhine Community Council, which is a heavily Appalachian community council, the Pendleton Neighborhood Association, which is black, and the Mount Auburn Good Housing Corporation all banded together to deal with the historic preservation plight. And matter of fact, they lost in city council, but they got their platform and proposal together to delay it on the state level. and they was able to win that battle. Matter of fact, the state planning division indicated that they would have to study the city of Cincinnati proposal and that they could not take action on it for the next 3 years. And so for all intents and purposes, that would not have occurred if the various neighborhood councils had not banded together to fight that. Matter of fact, what has existed, there is an organization known as the Coalition of Neighborhoods, which is a group of all inner city neighborhoods that band together to deal with incidents like this. And I think that more so than any community that I've been in, I've seen black and white groups work together. Matter of fact, I'm the director of an agency that serves the city of Lincoln Heights, which is the largest all-black city in the United States. And we also relate to the Eastern Area Council, which is an Appalachian group. And both of these groups work together on chosen kinds of issues. Now, they don't work together on everything, and they pick and choose, but I think that people have gotten to the point where they understand that the black community gets pitted against the Appalachian community consciously for meager resources. And yes. No, see what happened, this is an excellent question. What happened is that we were riding on the coattails of a lot of Democratic legislation that provided Section 8 housing, provided all kind of housing subsidy, and as not having the wherewithal to deal with it privately, we used the federal dole to finance many of these projects. Matter of fact, many of the facilities that you saw in terms of the amphitheater, in terms of the parking garage, in terms of WCET, much of that was financed with federal money because we've come through an era of Kennedy money, Johnson money, even Nixon money. And so much of what you see over the last 12 or 14 years was predicated on the fact that federal dollars would exist in some form, be it block grants, revenue sharing, et cetera, et cetera. But now we've run into a situation where the monies to underwrite these programs have been dried up, that have been taken away from municipalities. So the kind of subsidy money that we had earmarked for neighborhood residents to aid and abet the development of these housing facilities is no longer there. And so what has happened, we've been hit with the stark reality of the neighborhood rehabilitation program not having the federal subsidies, which means that people would have to carry their own freight. And being able to carry their own freight, we know that the welfare recipients and people in the neighborhood can't carry it. For an example, there is a facility known as the Uptown Towers that was built by the West End Development Corporation that had a very high mix of Section 8 houses and commercial facilities for small businessmen. Now, the commercial facilities were being highly subsidized by federal money. Now that that federal money is dried up, many of the black businesses in the neighborhood can no longer afford to pay the freight in terms of the commercial space. And so what we have is a classic case of planning and development being based upon the availability of federal, state, and local money. When that federal, state, and local money dries up, we're back at the same old situation, is the people with the money carry the weight. And that's the dilemma that we have found in the neighborhood. Matter of fact, the classic dilemma is when you begin to get neighborhood people to deal with savings and loans. You know the interest rate today. We had predicated this total project on the fact that individuals who would purchase homes would get a write-down of the interest rate, that City Hall had put together a pool of money to eat into the interest rates. And matter of fact, many people were recruited to the neighborhood saying that you would only be able to pay 7% interest money in the neighborhood. And so that's the situation that we're caught in. And I don't think we're any different than any other situation like this, where most of our planning strategies were based on the availability of federal monies. As a registered Democrat, I would hope so. But I don't think that's part of the issue. I think that there are some realities around the sheer cost of rehabbing inner city property. And as professionals that have somewhat fantasized about what can occur, you hit into the stark reality that it's all about money. And no matter how well-intended your social program is, without the wherewithal to put it together, many of these beautiful plans and principles will go by the wayside, because it really is about money. Yeah. Well, it's private. Sure. Let me just talk briefly about the kinds of things that we have attempted to do. And I think your question is right on target. I indicated that there was a pool of money that the city put up in terms of aiding and abetting people to purchase the houses. Matter of fact, the city has given an outright grant of $5,000 per unit up to a maximum of $50,000.